So, we are continuing in our series Resilient. We have been looking at the life of Joseph, and if anybody knew what it meant to stand strong through difficult times, it was Joseph. And his story comes out of the book of Genesis. That's the first book in the Bible. And Joseph has been through a lot. He's been betrayed by his own family, he was taken away from them, put into slavery in a foreign land, again made a slave, and then falsely accused of a crime, thrown into a prison, and seemingly forgotten about. He was in that prison for 2 years, and so he knows all about hardship. And so Scripture tells stories like his a lot of the time. I mean, it's full of stories of people who have to be resilient. They're going through difficult times and they have to stand strong. And so that's why we're going through this series. It seems like that should be a thing that you and I talk about. Like, how can you and I be resilient in the times that we're facing? And everybody, let's be honest, is going through different things and in different ways. But the question remains, no matter where you are or how hardly you've been affected by COVID and by all of the things going on around us, the question still remains, no matter who you are, how can you stand strong in difficult times? And so that's why we keep coming back to this story. And so if you haven't been here over the last few weeks, I'd love to just catch you up on what we've learned, okay? So I'm going to give you the crash course on what we've been through so far, okay? So the first thing we learned in the very first week was we learned that we need to trust in God's good judgment. That when bad things happen to you and I, especially at the hands of another person, that you and I aren't called to seek out revenge or to carry bitterness and let that, fill our heart. Rather than doing that, we're to seek to do good, to act out of love, and to trust in God's good judgment that in due time, God will make all wrongs right. And that you and I can trust in that, and it frees us to do the right thing and to do the loving thing. And so that is one way that we can stand resilient. The second thing we learned was about the presence of God and how supremely important that is in difficult times. When we looked at Joseph, we saw that God was with him. It said it again and again as he was sold into slavery and serving, and then as he was thrown into prison after being falsely accused of a crime. Through it all, even though it was a difficult time and there was injustice, God was with him, and it made all the difference in Joseph's life. And in the same way, if you are following after Jesus and trusting him, he has promised that his presence, his spirit, will live in you and guide you and give you strength and purpose and perspective and the things that you need in order to be resilient, to stand strong. And then last week we learned about the empowerment of God. That Joseph was actually found himself in a position where it's because God had given him unique gifts and abilities that he was able to kind of rise out of the situation that he was in. He had been in this prison, and God had given him the ability to discern and understand dreams. And because of that, he helped a cupbearer, and then it was 2 years later that cupbearer would then help Joseph. So that's what we learned about last week. And if you remember, if you've forgotten or you don't know the story at all, where we ended was this, that Pharaoh had two dreams. He had a dream and he couldn't interpret it. And he was asking everybody for advice and discernment to understand what it was. But nobody knew. Nobody could figure it out. And so it was finally that Joseph comes back into this story. Now, let's talk about these dreams. So Pharaoh had two dreams. The first was this. He had this dream that there were these 7 very healthy and big, beautiful cows that came out of the Nile. And then after those, there were 7 very sickly, gaunt cows came out of the Nile, and they devoured the healthy ones. Now, I understand this. He wakes up from this dream and he asks this question, was that Was that something I need to pay attention to, or was that just a very spicy taco making its way through my digestive tract? Like, what's causing this dream? So he goes back to sleep, but he has another dream, and it's very similar. He has a dream that he sees these seven uh, heads of grain, and they're big and wonderful and healthy and appealing. But then there's these other seven heads of grain, and they're diseased and they're sickly, they're not well, and they devour the healthy ones. So after the second dream, he wakes up and he's like, this has to mean something. And so he begins asking those in his royal court, people who he would normally go to, his magi or his sorcerer, whoever these people were, asking them and asking who can interpret this. Nobody could. Now, if you remember the story, there's this cupbearer, and Joseph had done him a favor by interpreting his dream, and Joseph's only request was, when you get back in front of the Pharaoh, remember me, like mention like that I'm falsely imprisoned, that I'm rotting away in this pit for something I did not do. Just all you have to do is remember this. And the cupbearer forgot. But at this moment, as the Pharaoh's realizing nobody can interpret this dream, suddenly the light bulb goes off in the cupbearer's mind, and he says, hey, I know this guy named Joseph. He interpreted my dreams. It all came to pass exactly like he said it would. You should talk to him. And so he calls for Joseph. They clean him up. They give him a shave. They give him a haircut. Apparently, barbershops were open there in Egypt at the time. No pandemic stopping that. So he gets cleaned up, gets brought before Pharaoh, and Pharaoh tells him these dreams. And this is what it says in Genesis 41, starting in verse 25. This is where we're picking up the story. Again, Genesis 41. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh, dreams are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he's about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, as are the 7 empty ears blighted by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. It is as I told Pharaoh, God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. There will come 7 years of great plentiful throughout all of the land of Egypt. After them there will arise 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will consume the land. The plenty will no longer be known in the land because of the famine that will follow, for it will be very grievous, very serious. And the doubling of Pharaoh's dream means that this thing is fixed by God, and God will shortly bring it about. So, the dream. Now that we hear the interpretation, it seems obvious to us, right? There's 7 good years of harvest and a farm. This is an agricultural society. They're all farming, and he's saying there's going to be 7 really good years. But after that, there's going to be 7 very, very difficult years. So Joseph knows something. He knows this, that difficult times are coming again. Just think about all he's been through. He gets pulled out of prison, and I bet he has this thought, maybe my luck's going to change. And the news is this, that there is a devastating famine that is coming your way. And you got 7 years to get ready for it. So how is Joseph going to stand strong again? I mean, this time at least he has the benefit of seeing that it's coming. So what is he going to do? Let's continue on. Verse 33. Now therefore let Pharaoh select a man who is discerning and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers over the land, and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plenteous years. Let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, and lay up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. That food shall be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine that are to befall the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish through the famine. So he's talking to the most powerful person in the world, and he says, I know what is needed in this season. He says, with 7 good years and then another 7 bad years of famine, I know what we need. You need a discerning and wise person. Okay, you need somebody who has great wisdom. And if we're going to navigate these difficult years, we need someone who can manage and do so wisely to oversee the keeping of this food. Because if we keep 1/5 of the food over the next 7 years, then there will be enough over the 7 years of famine, all the bad years. He's saying we're going to need to appoint overseers. And I mean, Joseph's coming up with this like strategic plan for the entire region. Are you getting the clues to what Joseph is telling you and I, what we need to navigate a difficult season? Joseph is saying what we need is wisdom. He believes that they're going to need wisdom over the next 14 years to survive what's coming ahead. This passage, it continues on, verse 37. The proposal pleased Pharaoh and all his servants. Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find anyone else like this, one in whom is the Spirit of God?" So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has shown you all this, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only with regard to the throne will I be greater than you." And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set you over all the land and Egypt." Now this is crazy. This kid, betrayed, enslaved, imprisoned, forgotten. And now he's going to be lifted up to be higher than no one else but Pharaoh for the next 14 years. I love it. Pharaoh goes, who? Like, who has the Spirit of God in him like this man? Like Joseph. Pharaoh's saying, I don't know anyone who's wiser than him. And so hear me out. Hear me very clearly. Hard times require great wisdom. Now let's go ahead and define wisdom, because that's a word that might get thrown around a lot, okay? We don't always understand or hear, or it can be confused. It gets lumped into things like, so I just have to say, wisdom is not facts. It's not just knowledge, and it's not just experience. It's kind of, in a way, leveraging all of those things to make good decisions. The Oxford Dictionary puts it this way. Wisdom is the soundness of an action or decision with regard to the application of experience, knowledge, and good judgment. Or maybe a way that you and I can maybe remember it a little more easily is this. It's knowing the truth and walking in that truth. So when we're going through difficult times, what do we need to do? We need to know the truth. We need to be able to see a situation clearly. And then we need to take actions that are in line with that truth, that keeps our values and our priorities in focus. For Joseph, 7 good years of harvest and then 7 famine. That's the situation. That's the cold, hard, difficult truth that they've just been given. And what's his values? What's his priority? That people don't die. Pretty simple, right? That people don't starve to death, especially him and his family. And so he makes decisions, and he takes actions according to those truths and those values. But what does that mean for you and I? How does this help you and me right now? How do you and I get wisdom? I think that's a good question. And you and I have the benefit, I guess, to kind of see that the life and the situation, the circumstances we're in now, we can now see that it's not a blip on the screen. It's not a momentary flash. But we can see the hard truth of the road that's ahead of us as a country, right? The problems that are facing us, the difficult times that are going to be ahead for us. So how do you and I get wisdom? Well, the first is this. I think it's to know the scriptures. Listen, we believe scriptures are a gift from God. Not only is it direct wisdom, they're direct wisdom from the Proverbs, but there's wisdom that we can gain through reading the stories of people who have failed and failed miserably. People maybe like David or Jacob or the Apostle Peter. We can gain wisdom through listening to the teaching of Jesus. Even the people of his day, if you go through the Gospels, they were astonished by his wisdom, by the power and authority that were in his words. And you and I can still be affected and learn and grow in wisdom through them. Scripture is a gift. We can learn more wisdom too through watching even how Jesus lived, watching his actions and how he treated people. Scripture's a gift. It's a gift that tells us the truth. It helps us to see clearly who we are. It helps us to see who God is and his character and his nature. It's important to know these things because we need to know the truth in order to live accordingly. That's why earlier this year we did a series, called Jesus Never Said That, because we wanted to make clear, like, there's some things that we believe about Jesus or believe about God, but they're not wisdom. They're not true. They're not accurate to who he is. Because we want you to know the truth. Because it's when you see things clearly, that's when you can make wise choices. So the first thing we got to do is I think we need to know scriptures. I think the second thing we need to do, not just know them, but trust in them, to really believe them. Here's the deal. Everybody is living their life on a foundation of faith. Everybody's worldview, if you dig down far enough, there's justifications and there's facts, or there's traditions, there's all these things. But if you dig down far enough into any person's worldview, the foundation of it you will get to is faith. It's a matter of trust. At some point, you and I are trusting that something is true. And I think biblical wisdom comes when we recognize that we have been given the gift of these scriptures. And listen, I could go on a long tangent about how people have taken them and twisted them or misused them or grabbed one verse out of here and tried to apply it, or take the words of Paul out of its context and try to say, oh, these people can't have authority or don't have a say in the church. Listen, I get that. I get that. But here is this fundamental question that you and I have to answer. Like, when it comes to the bedrock of what we believe is true and faithful and strong and what we can build our lives on, what is that? And I would put forward to you that it is the Christian faith, that is Jesus, and that it's the wisdom we see through him and through Scripture. To have a trust in it. So not just to know scriptures, but to have a trust in it and to say, even though at times it's counterintuitive, I'm going to trust that this wisdom from God is greater than the wisdom of man. There's a lot of things that Jesus calls us to do that are counterintuitive. Oh, you want to be first? Then become a servant to all. So that's a really big important thing, is to trust. And then the third thing is to live these scriptures out. D.L. Moody once said this: the Bible was not given to increase our knowledge, but to change lives. You can study the Bible, you can get a degree in theology, and it means very little if it's not actually transformative in your life. When we know Scripture, and then we put our trust into what we have read and this wisdom that we receive from it, then it becomes something that can actually transform the way you and I think and live, and it must do that. And then the fourth thing is pretty simple. And the last few weeks I've just talked about simple prayers that you and I can give. And I think this one is easily one of the best. Scripture says this: if any of you lack wisdom, ask for it. God is a good Father. He wants you to have wisdom, and he wants you to make wise decisions. God is not up in heaven gleeful as he watches us stumble through life and make mistakes. That is not the picture we are given of this good God. No, he wants you to have wisdom. He also doesn't upload it to you like the Matrix. Like it's one of these things that you have to ask for it, and then be willing to receive it. And sometimes you get it in different ways. But the point is this: if you lack wisdom in your finances, if you lack wisdom in your parenting or your relationships, or maybe maybe you're like me. Maybe you need wisdom in even understanding yourself and why you act some days the way you do, and why you feel the way that maybe you need wisdom just in knowing you. God says if you lack wisdom, if you want to help in making wise choices and getting through difficult times, ask. Ask for it, and he will give it to you. Here's the thing. If we need wisdom, and I think we do, in difficult times, I think that's what we need to get through it. I think we need all of the things we've talked about, but we need wisdom to be able to make wise choices, to make decisions that are going to help us get through things. Wisdom gives you the confidence to know there's a solution and there's a way to get through this. And that comes through having the wisdom of God. And I can't help but thinking of the gospel. You know, when it comes to you and I and our relationship to God, or the lack of one, when we look at the story, we see God's wisdom on full display. Because I think of all the ways that you and I would solve this crazy problem we find ourselves in. It wouldn't be the way that God did it, but the way God did it was the way. Right? Think about it in this way. The problem, the gospel, the story that we are told is this: that God created us, but then we ran from our home. We ran away in rebellion and shame and pride. We ran away from our home and got lost in the woods of this life, and it led to separation from God our Father and death. So there's this dilemma of how do we solve this problem? How do we find our way back home? And the story of the gospel is this: that you and I are utterly lost. Like, we can't find our way back. We're totally lost. We're just wandering around. But God in his goodness sent his only Son into this world to go into the woods to find us and to make a way for us to come back home. And that's what we see in the life of Jesus, is God's intervention into creation, into humanity, to not only show us who he is and to give us wisdom to be able to navigate this life better, but also to give us a way to come back home. And so on the cross we see God showing great compassion and grace towards us, a rebellious creature, humanity. But we also see him showing that he cares about right and wrong. And so God's wisdom, it's so much further than what we can imagine. Nothing that we could create. But it's available to you and I. His wisdom is available if we ask him for it. We're going to go back into our time of worship. Again, I don't know where you are right now with everything going on. I know that as a parent with 2 kids that are about to go back to school virtually, I'm seeking God's wisdom. I'm trying to look at the facts of the situation, the truth and the reality of it, and then trying to say, well, considering my values and my priorities and what I care about and what I believe is true, God, what is the best way to go forward? I bet you're asking questions like that too. I just want to remind you, we can ask for God's wisdom, and he is good and faithful to give it to us. Let's go into worship together, and when we come back, I'd love to pray for you.